So Camilla just tore her own name off a gold pass at the gate of Windsor Castle. And the part that I genuinely cannot stop thinking about is not the pass itself. It is the fact that the pass was printed with her royal cipher, stamped along the bottom edge in the exact typeface the palace uses on official correspondence. And she never signed it, she never saw it, she never knew it existed until a member of her personal staff placed one on her desk 3 days after 30 members of the public were turned away from a stair they had already paid to climb. Here is the thing. Windsor Castle has a tower, you know the one? The round tower, the one you see from the motorway, the one every tourist photographs from the long walk. For decades, that tower stair was closed, the stonework was fragile, the route was narrow, the spiral steps had not carried regular foot traffic since the restoration work began under Elizabeth. The Royal Collection Trust, which manages public access to the occupied royal palaces, said the conservation risk was too high. Fair enough. Stone does not argue. Stone cracks. Then, earlier this year, the trust completed a full restoration. They reinforced the spiral stair from the inside, new iron bracing behind the original stone shell. They installed modern railings that looked medieval but could hold real weight. They tested the steps under supervised load. And they announced that for the first summer in living memory, 30 members of the public could book a timed climb every morning, numbered tickets, 30 per session, 1 session per day, a simple system. The tickets sold out within hours. If you are new here on Throne Files, hit subscribe so you do not miss any updates on this story. Now here is what happened next. On the morning of the very first public climb, a woman named Margaret Hale arrived at the tower gate with ticket number 14. She was 73 years old. She had driven from Gloucestershire 90 minutes in a small car with a flask of tea on the passenger seat because her late husband David had always wanted them to climb that stair together. He talked about it every time they drove past Windsor on the motorway. He could see the tower from the road, and he would say, "One day we will get up there, Maggie." He died in the spring, quietly, at home, with the curtains open and the radio on. She booked the ticket the week the trust opened the bookings. She had the printed confirmation in her handbag. She had his photograph in her coat pocket, the one from their anniversary at Balmoral, the one where he was laughing. And when she reached the gate, the stair was locked. Hold on to that detail. The stair was locked. Not because of weather, not because of structural failure, not because of a last-minute royal visit requiring security. The stair was locked because a Windsor curator named Adrian Vale had cancelled all 30 public tickets and replaced them with 6 gold donor passes. 6 passes, 6 names, each one printed on heavy cream cardstock with a gold border and a small crest reading Patron Circle, and along the bottom edge of each pass, stamped in the same typeface used on official Queen correspondence, was Camilla Royal Cipher. Now look, a royal cipher is not a decoration. It is the personal monogram of the sovereign or consort used on state documents, official letters, and authorized royal instruments. When Camilla's cipher appears on a document, that document carries the implied authority of the Queen. It means the Queen approved it. It means the Queen stands behind it. But Camilla did not approve it. Camilla did not sign it. Camilla did not know it existed. Adrian Vale printed her name on 6 gold passes without her knowledge, cancelled 30 paid public tickets, locked the stair with the master key he carried on his belt, and opened the tower route exclusively to 6 private donors who paid for the privilege of climbing a stair the public had already been promised. He sold the same stair twice. Let me show you how this unraveled, because the mechanism is where the real story lives. Adrian Vale was not a politician or a member of the royal family. He was a curator employed by the Royal Collection Trust to manage visitor access and conservation scheduling for a specific section of Windsor Castle. His authority extended to route planning, conservation supervision, and scheduling. He held the master key to the tower spiral stair, a single brass key on a leather fob that controlled the only lock on the only entrance to the restored route. Reportedly, Vale had been advocating internally for what he called a heritage premium program, a private access tier for high-value donors that would run alongside the public system. The idea had been discussed. It had not been approved. No written authorization existed. But Vale went ahead. He created the gold passes himself. He sourced the card stock from a printing firm in Berkshire. He added the Patron Circle crest, which is a design that does not exist in any Royal Collection Trust style guide. And then, the detail that turned a bad decision into a forgery, he added Camilla's cipher. Sources describe that he copied the cipher from an official correspondence template he had access to through his curatorial role. He did not ask, he did not submit a request. He printed the Queen name onto a private revenue instrument and presented it to 6 donors as if it were a royal endorsement. Honestly, the question is not why he did it. The question is how long he thought it would last with a queen name at the bottom that the queen never put there. Now let me take you into Vale office for a moment, because this is where the arrogance becomes physical. Sources describe a small room on the ground floor of the castle visitor complex, oak desk, mullioned window facing the courtyard, a framed photograph of the tower stair before the restoration. Vale kept the master key in a leather fob in his top drawer. He kept a copy of the Conservation Covenant in the filing cabinet beside the window. He had access to the Royal Collection Trust correspondence templates, which included the official cipher formats for the King, the Queen, and the Princess Royal. He used Camilla's cipher template to stamp the passes. He knew exactly what it meant. He used it because it would make 6 wealthy donors feel that the Queen had personally opened the door for them. He used it because it would make the donor tier look authorized, and he used it because he believed, reportedly, that nobody would check. That was his mistake. Someone always checks. Camilla first learned about the gold passes on a quiet morning at Windsor. A member of her personal household staff brought one of the passes to her desk. It sat between her morning correspondence and a briefing folder. She picked it up. She felt the weight of the card. She saw the gold border. She saw the patron circle crest. She turned it over and read the terms on the back, which described exclusive access to the tower route for the bearer and one guest. And she found her cipher along the bottom edge. She ran her thumb along the printed letters. She asked one question: who authorized this? No one in her household could answer. That question started the audit. Now here is where it changes. The first person Camilla contacted was not Charles. She contacted Princess Anne, and the reason matters deeply. The Royal Collection Trust, which manages public access to occupied royal palaces, including Windsor, Buckingham Palace, and the Palace of Holyrood House, operates under a governance structure that Anne has been closely involved with for decades. Anne does not run the trust, but her long institutional relationship with the Crown Estate and the broader royal patronage system means that when a trust-managed property has a compliance failure, Anne is among the first people who get the call. Anne was at Gatcomber Park when the call came. She was in her study, the one with the horse prints on the wall and the desk that faces the paddock. She listened. She asked 2 questions. Then she asked for 3 documents: the original capacity ledger for the tower route, the conservation covenant that governed the restoration, and the insurance policy that covered the public climb. She did not ask for Vale version of events. She did not call the curator. She did not convene a meeting. She asked for the paper. And the paper arrived by courier the next morning in a grey archive box with the trust seal on the lid. Here is the thing about those 3 documents. They told a completely different story from the one Adrian Vale was telling. Vale claimed that Camilla household had verbally requested the donor tier. He described a conversation at a reception, informal, casual, nothing on paper. He could not name the staff member who made the request. He could not produce an email. He could not produce a memo. He could not produce a signed authorization form. The form existed in the trust system as a blank template, and it was blank because nobody had ever filled it in. But Vale insisted the instruction came from the Queen's side and that the donor program was a legitimate extension of the patronage relationship. Anne found the insurer email, and honestly, this is the moment the entire story breaks open. The insurer had underwritten the public tower climb at its full 30 visitor capacity. The policy was dated weeks before Vale created the gold passes. The conservation risk assessment, which Vale claimed required a reduced capacity private program to protect the fragile stonework, was already resolved by the restoration. The stone could handle 30 visitors per session. The new railings were certified. The route was approved at full public capacity. The insurance was in place. Vale added the Camilla branded donor passes after the insurance was already underwritten. The conservation argument, the one he used to justify cancelling the public tickets, was not a policy decision. It was a fabrication. He invented a risk that the insurer had already cleared in order to replace a public system with a private one. Hold on to that. He fabricated the conservation risk after the route was already insured and approved at full capacity. He cancelled 30 paid public tickets and created 6 private passes for the same route. He stamped them with the Queen name to make the private tier look authorized. He sold the same stair twice. And now the conflict moved domains. It was no longer about Camilla personal embarrassment. It was no longer about a curator making a revenue decision above his authority. It was a documented access fraud. A public institution had sold the same approved route to 2 different groups at 2 different prices under 2 different names, and one of those names was forged. That is not administration. That is not initiative. That is a system failure with a forged royal name. at the center, and the woman with ticket number 14 was still waiting. Now let me pause here because the institutional detail matters. The conservation covenant for the tower restoration was not a simple internal memo. It was a legal instrument signed by the trust, countersigned by the Crown Estate, and registered with the heritage insurer. It specified the visitor capacity, the access schedule, the maintenance obligations, and the safety standards. It was partly funded by national lottery money, which means public money, which means the public had a contractual right to the access the covenant described. When Vale cancelled the public tickets, he did not just make a business decision. He breached a registered covenant that carried public funding obligations. That is not the same as changing a tour schedule. That is the same as locking a door that the public paid to open. Vale tried something desperate. He went around Anne. He sent a letter to Charles through the private secretary channel, suggesting that Anne was overstepping her institutional role and that the donor program represented sound financial stewardship of a fragile heritage asset. He framed the audit as a personal attack on a loyal servant who was trying to protect irreplaceable stonework from public wear. He even threatened, through the letter, that if the public climb reopened under its original terms, the conservation insurance would be voided, forcing a full season closure of the tower route. But the insurer email destroyed that argument before it could breathe. The insurance was written for public access at 30 visitors per session. The donor tier had no separate policy. The conservation covenant, which Elizabeth had approved when the restoration was funded partly with national lottery money, specified the 30 visitor numbered system. Vale had not adjusted the conservation framework to accommodate the donor tier. He had bypassed it entirely. Charles did not respond to Vale's letter, and this is important. He did not respond not because he chose silence as a strategy. He did not respond because the mechanism did not require his response. The Royal Collection Trust operates under its own governance. The tower route fell under a specific conservation covenant with its own compliance terms. The insurance was independently underwritten. The Curator contract had its own accountability structure. Anne did not need the sovereign permission to act. She needed the documents, and she had them. A queen name on a forged pass is still a forgery, and now we reach the gate. Sources describe a morning in the last week of July. Windsor Castle, the Tower Gate, early light across the courtyard. The spiral stair was still locked with the master key on Vale belt. The 30 displaced visitors had not been refunded. The 6 gold passes were still technically active, and Camilla arrived. She was not scheduled for a public appearance at the tower. She came because of what the insurer email proved. She came because her name was on a document she never signed. And she came because Margaret Hale, ticket number 14, had written a letter to the Royal Collection Trust. The letter was 3 paragraphs long. It asked politely why her paid confirmation was no longer valid. It mentioned David. It mentioned the drive from Gloucestershire. It mentioned the photograph in her coat pocket. That letter was forwarded to Camilla's office. It was read, and reportedly it was placed beside the gold pass on the same desk where Camilla had first seen her forged cipher. Camilla stood at the locked gate. Anne stood beside her with 3 documents in a leather folder: the insurer email, the original route ledger, and the unsigned household authorization form, the blank form that proved no one in Camilla's household ever requested the donor tier. Behind the rope, in the courtyard, the displaced ticket holders had gathered. Some held their printed confirmations, slightly creased from weeks in handbags and kitchen drawers. Margaret Hale stood among them with ticket number 14 in her hand. Vale stood at the gate. The master key was on his belt. The gold passes were in a leather folder under his arm. Camilla took one of the gold passes from the folder. She found the cipher strip along the bottom edge, her own monogram in the typeface she recognized from 1,000 letters she had actually signed, and she tore it from the card. She did not speak. She placed the torn strip on the ledger page that Anne held open. Anne stepped forward. She held out her hand. Not for the pass, for the key. And here is the moment everyone watching will remember. Vale looked at the torn cipher strip lying on the open ledger. He looked at the insurer email in Anne's other hand. He looked at the blank authorization form, the form that should have carried a signature and did not. He reached to his belt, unclipped the master key from the leather fob, and placed it in Anne's palm. The brass was still warm. Anne closed her hand around the brass key. She could feel the warmth of it, the warmth of a man who had carried it on his belt every morning for 3 years, who had locked and unlocked that door as if the stair belonged to him. She placed the key on the gate desk beside the open ledger. His Curator contract was crossed out at the gate desk, not suspended, not reviewed, crossed out. The 6 gold donor passes were cancelled. The 30 numbered public tickets were restored. The Conservation Board posted the original schedule on the gate board, the exact schedule that had been approved, insured, and funded by the public. The key belongs to the door, not the man who locked it. Now look, what makes this so striking to me is not just the fraud, it is the reversal. The audience expected Camilla to be the problem. Every headline about those gold passes pointed at the Queen. The cipher was hers. The patron circle name sounded like her initiative. The locked stare looked like royal entitlement closing a public door. Everything pointed to Camilla, but Camilla was the solution. The Queen whose name was forged onto the passes was the one who tore it off. The person who appeared to block public access is the person who restored it. And she did it not by issuing a royal decree, not by sending a private secretary with a sealed envelope, but by standing at a locked gate in the morning light and pulling her own name off a piece of heavy cardstock with her bare hands. That is not protocol, that is not ceremony, that is not a press release drafted by a communications office and released through the proper channels. That is a woman who understood that her name had been turned into a weapon against the people the institution is supposed to serve and who decided to disarm it herself, in public, at the gate, with her own hands. And honestly, that image alone is worth more than any official statement the palace could have released. And here is the scene that will travel. The tower stair unlocked. Anne turned the master key one final time, the gate opened, and the first person through was not a donor. It was not a curator. It was not a member of the royal family. It was Margaret Hale, 73, with ticket number 14 in one hand and David photograph in the other. She climbed the spiral stair, slowly, carefully, one hand on the new railing, taking each step the way you take a step when you know someone is climbing right beside you even though they are gone. She reached the top. She could see the long walk from the window. The morning sun was warm on the stone. She held the ticket David always wanted them to use. That is what the stair was restored for. That is who the numbered system was built to serve, and that is what Adrian Vale sold twice. Now let me tell you what happened to Vale. He walked through the public exit, not the staff corridor, not the service entrance, the public exit, the same door Margaret Hale used to enter. He had no key, he had no contract, he had no authority over the visitor route he managed for 3 years. The Conservation Board posted the restored, numbered schedule on the gateboard. The 6 cancelled gold passes lay beneath it, with the torn cipher strip resting on top, a small ribbon of cream card stock carrying the ghost of a name that was never his to use. And here is the expectation reversal that completes this story. People assumed Charles would intervene. They thought the king would protect the donor program, or cushion the curator removal, or at least send a message through channels that the audit had gone too far. He did none of those things, not because he chose silence as a calculated strategy, not because he was sending a message through inaction, but because the entire mechanism operated without him. The trust has its own governance, the covenant had its own terms, the insurance had its own documentation, Anne had her own authority, and Charles was not absent from the story. The story simply did not require him. The institution worked the way Elizabeth designed it to work. That is not a weakness. That is not a failure of royal leadership.